Hello, everyone, and welcome to the making of a castle, or welcome back, I should say. I started this series about 3 years ago at the start of my channel, and I have come back to reboot it and redo it with better information, better explanations, and a much better castle. My name is Coco, and the goal of this series is to show you how to build mega builds and just really break it down and make it much easier and talk about design aspects that help a lot with making mega builds. Now, right off the bat, the biggest thing people struggle with their mega builds is there's so much space to work with and you kind of run out of ideas. So for that, I recommend a lot of repetition. Um, on a smaller scale, repetition can look, I don't want to say lazy, but it can look very overdone and overused. But when you are building something on a massive scale, that repetition isn't going to be quite as obvious and in your face. Um, and realistically, on a bigger scale, there's going to be certain parts that are very obviously meant to draw the eye, and there's going to be certain parts that are just kind of backup, for lack of a better word. So, what I'm building here is backup. It's meant to be the outer defense wall of my castle that I'm creating, and I am completely freestyling this. Now, one thing I will be doing different this series is I'm making use of the Lightmatica mechanics and kind of speeding up the process. That way, I'm not showing you the same thing over and over again, but I will talk as long as I have something to say. Now, what I've done is I kind of like to keep the traditional medieval shapes, so lots of arches, and you kind of tend to use the same material over and over. So I've done a lot of stone. Um, Simply because medieval castles, while intricate and beautiful, did not make use of a lot of different colors and stuff on the outside. So I have very minimal differences in color. It's mostly stone. I use a bit of deep slate for some contrast and some wood on the sides just to kind of show support. Now, the next thing you'll see me doing, and I haven't done it on all of the wall sections yet, but there are no windows actually on this defense wall because it would make sense. It's a defense wall. Um, Having windows that low kind of defeats the point of like that safety barrier. So no, there's no windows. I will end up backing them up with stone. Now, in the aspects of designing this, I did add a little bit more color than a true medieval castle, and that's because I'm also going with a bit of a fantasy vibe. But realistically, if you were to do this, you would want to stick with two, maybe three colors for a medieval palette, and just make use of a lot of texturing and depth and various things like that for your detailing. Like I said, medieval castles weren't made of a whole bunch of different materials, so there's really no point in adding extras. Now, this is kind of slowed down, so we're going to speed this up real quick. All right, with that done, and today we are only working on the outer part of the outer wall. Um, Next episode, we'll be working on the inside and making the pathway, which will be a whole bunch of different lessons. But you'll see now that we're a little bit closer, I'm really just detailing with shapes. There's a lot of arches, which is very common in medieval structure, partially for architectural reasons. It was the best way they knew at the time to support what they built and make it strong. But it's also a very grand look. Um, Arches, domes, any kind of broad curved shape really showed a kind of superiority and an upper class look. And so I'm really making use of that. It was in the lower section, and now I'm also adding it to the upper section. Now, when you're making outer walls like this, you can make them much higher, and realistically, they would be. Like I said, I'm adding a bit of a fantasy flair, so it's not quite as big of a deal. But for something more realistic, you would want it to be much taller. Obviously, the point of a defense tower is not to be something that you can easily hop over. But for this, I'm just making a second layer on top of what we already built, and it's kind of something simple, just to show where the walkway is. If you look at medieval castles, they tend to have these walkways around the top of the walls as well, so you can transport up there or within the walls themselves. But we won't be building the actual walkway until next episode. For this one, we're just adding a little bit of detail to the outer part, and it kind of signifies where it is. When you see the arch, you kind of see that it's supporting something. So when you see that it's supporting something, you want it to look strong, and that's kind of how this looks. Now, speeding it up again, now we've sped this up again, and we're just kind of looking at what I built here, just for a few last closing remarks. Um, the goal of this is just to get the outer wall built, and like I said, repetition is going to be your friend. You don't have to make something super different every time. You don't have to make everything super unique when you're making massive builds on this scale. Um, and that applies for things even smaller than this, to be honest. There comes a point where the intricate detail and all the differences actually becomes too much. If I did something different on everything at this scale, it would be too much. When you have a smaller build, everything kind of draws your eye because it's easy to see all at once. And that's kind of what you want to do with your mega builds as well. You don't want everything to be hard to see and have a lot and just be busy. There's difference between being detailed and telling a story and having things you can go back and see a second time that you didn't see the first time, and just having something that's really, really crowded. So with this, it's not overly crowded. It's about the same all the way around. It has continuity. It makes sense. This has been episode 1 of The Making of a Castle. I hope you enjoyed, and I can't wait to see you in episode 2. Goodbye!